Are you troubled by strange noises in the middle of the night? Do you experience feelings of dread in your retro gaming room? Have you or your family ever seen a bad reboot of a classic 80s movie? If the answer is yes, then don't wait another minute. Pick up the phone and call the professionals. Ghostbusters. And thanks to Activision's early acquisition of the tie-in license in 1984, every 10-year-old with an 8-bit micro was on call to serve their neighborhood supernatural elimination needs. And what a strange and beautiful thing this game is. On first starting the game, the player is treated to some sort of business strategy simulation, loaned $10,000 by your friendly bank manager. You must choose a car. Do you go for speed over space, or get the biggest car and carry as much kit as you can, and equip it with ghost traps and whatever other ghost-catching equipment suits your strategy? Succeed in the game and you receive an account number which by some manner of witchcraft allows you access to whatever money you ended the game with. That was just one of the things about this game that blew my 10-year-old mind. Once the main game has started, you typically get a single call to a Slimer that needs trapping before everything stops for about 10 minutes, allowing you to go out and spend the last of your petty cash on a Chinese. The only hint that the game hasn't actually crashed being the slowly increasing PK energy meter at the bottom of the screen. You can spend this time patrolling the streets, freezing the cute little roamers as they try to make their way to Zol or team up to unleash Marshmallowy Armageddon. And if you acquired a ghost vacuum at the start, you can get to work cleaning up the town on the driving section of the game, which is otherwise a rather pointless wasted opportunity for a minigame. The calm before the storm can be a bit tedious, but once the Twinkie starts to grow, you'll soon be chasing ghostly sightings all across the city. This is complicated by the fact that you have to return to Ghostbusters HQ if you either fill all your traps or get all your colleagues slimed, and in my first time playing this in 20-odd years it was much more frequently the latter. And so we come to the key part of the game, the actual busting of ghosts. This is done not in the ballroom, but outside the front doors of various differently decorated but otherwise identical New York buildings, where you must navigate two stick men into suitable positions for their streamers to hold the ghost. Without crossing, that would be bad, so that the trap can be set to catch it. The whole process is actually easier to do than it is to describe, but because you can't actually change the angle of your streamers, only move them closer together once they are, streaming, good positioning, perfect timing, and no small amount of luck are required to actually catch a Slimer. While all this is going on, the gatekeeper and keymaster are aimlessly roaming the streets, slowly at first, but picking up pace as the city's PK energy level increases, until things suddenly reach melting point. They meet at Zol, an interdimensional crossrip occurs, and you have to complete the hardest, most anticlimactic final level in video game history. Sneak two stick men past Mr. Stay Puft and you will suddenly win. Which is easier said than done, of course, but that doesn't detract from how lame a final level this is. Objectively, Ghostbusters is a game that takes too long to get going, is stupidly repetitive, and has a crap ending. But it also remembers your winnings without the tedious business of saving game data, and has speech, although, because I played the game before I saw the film, for ages I had no idea that my stick Venkman was saying, "He slimed me," when I failed to catch a ghost. Although I've probably never played more than one game in a row, somehow the fact that it's just that bit too hard to get right first time, the way the pace ramps up exponentially, and the fact that you can come back next time with more money to bling out your Ectomobile, all add up to a game that I still enjoy playing. Ghostbusters is a licensed game by Activision based on the film of the same name. It was designed by David Crane and released for several home computer platforms in 1984, and later for video game console systems, including the Atari 2600, Master System and Nintendo Entertainment System. The primary target was the Commodore 64 and the programmer for the initial version of the game was Adam Bellin. All versions of the game were released in the USA except for the Amstrad CPC and ZX Spectrum versions, which were released only in Europe, and the MSX version, which was released only in Europe, South America, and Japan. In 1984, after the film Ghostbusters had been launched, John Dolgen, VP of Business Development at Columbia Pictures, approached Activision International President Gregory Fischbach and offered to license the game rights to Activision without specific rules or requests for the design or content of the game, only stipulating that it was to be finished as quickly as possible in order to be released while the movie was at peak popularity. Activision was forced to complete the programming work in only 6 weeks, in contrast to their usual several months of development time for a game. Activision had at the time a rough concept for a driving/maze game to be called Car Wars, and it was decided to build the Ghostbusters game from it. Both the movie and the game proved to be huge successes, with the game selling over 2 million copies by 1989. The player sets up a Ghostbusters franchise in a city whose psychokinetic, PK, energy levels have begun to rise. At the start of the game, the player is given a set amount of money and must use it to buy a vehicle and equipment for detecting/catching ghosts. They must then move through a grid representing the city, with flashing red blocks indicating sites of ghost activity. When the player moves to a flashing block, the game shifts to an overhead street view and they must drive to the site, attempting to vacuum up stray ghosts if the vehicle is equipped to do so. Upon reaching the site, the player must maneuver 2 Ghostbusters to guide a Slimer ghost into position to be drawn into a trap. Successfully doing so awards money, but each failure causes the PK energy level to jump and incapacitates one of the player's 3 team member characters. The player must return to the Ghostbusters headquarters at intervals to empty the traps and/or revive any incapacitated team members. As the game progresses, the player must also keep free-roaming ghosts from reaching the Temple of Zol for as long as possible. Each one that does so adds to the PK energy level. The ghosts occasionally merge to form the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, who will attempt to trample a city block. Stopping such an attack earns a bonus, but each failure to do so deducts money. If the player has not earned more money than the total spent on equipment when the PK energy level reaches its maximum of 9,999, the game ends immediately. Otherwise, the player must guide at least 2 Ghostbusters past Mr. Stay Puft in order to destroy the Temple of Zol. The game ends afterward, with the player earning a reward if successful. In some versions, including those for the Apple IIe and Commodore 64, the player is given an account number upon completing the game. Entering this number at the initial screen allows the player to start a new game plus with the cash balance from the end of the previous game, enabling the purchase of more expensive equipment. Prior to Ghostbusters, David Crane was one of the co-founders of Activision, and become a star at the company with games like Pitfall. The film was still in production when game development began. Tom Lopez, the vice president of Activision's product development, acquired the license for Ghostbusters to adapt into a game. Lopez went to the game design group, Specify, saying the game would have to be made in 6 weeks, opposed to the normal 9 months. Crane had been building his own game titled Car Wars, which already featured resource allocation segments where players could buy different armaments for their cars based on money they earned on levels. Columbia Pictures had no specific suggestion of what the game should be, but provided the film's script and some storyboards. Crane applied content from the film into the game, replacing guns, missiles, and rocket launchers with more appropriate weapons that the Ghostbusters would use. Unlike Crane's earlier games, which were predominantly developed by himself, Ghostbusters was made by a larger game design team, including game art made by Hilary Mills, sound effects and music by Russell Lieblick, and an intro sequence developed by Gary Kitchen, Dan Kitchen, and Alex DeMeo of Activision's East Coast division. Crane would later explain that his philosophy on creating a game on a licensed property would be to work on a game that worked within the theme of the license and to avoid making a game that borrows the look and feel of the original work, and thus applied this to turning Car Wars into Ghostbusters. The next weeks had the team working around the clock. Graphics in the game were developed by character artist Hilary Mills after Crane suggested he needed a variety of images, from animals, insects, and treasures, and it took a long time to get ghosts that properly resembled ghosts on an 8-bit system. Midway through development, Crane felt it was important to add digitized speech to the game and decided to add quotes from the film together with the crowd chanting "Ghostbusters" to capture the spirit of the film. Crane does not recall who did the digitized voice in the Ghostbusters game, but had vague memories of walking down the hall from his office getting 5 or 6 people to all yell, "Ghostbusters." The music in the game was developed by Russell Lieblich, based on Ray Parker, Jr.'s Ghostbusters theme, and is accompanied by the lyrics to the song in the game. Crane passed the task of creating a bouncing ball sing-along to Gary Kitchen and his game designers, which was added to the game at the very last minute. Crane also wanted to have a different victory screen. Crane said, "I expected players to be disappointed with it. Sadly, to really beef that one sequence would have taken memory and artists' time away from the main game." The game initially was going to have more elements such as when capturing ghosts, different enemies would show up with different solutions on how to deal with them. The game would also have had more accessories for the vehicle. Crane recalled that it would have been a better game with more development time, but also that it would then not have been such a financial success. Crane spent most of the time ensuring the game had a proper beginning, middle and end and, during final development, predominantly focused on fixing bugs. Crane said, as he does with all his games, he spent every hour that the schedule allowed tweaking the game, and it came out okay in the end. "I could have done a lot more, but in the final analysis it seems to have been enough."